Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Easy Conversations, a podcast about having easy conversations. I'm your host, Furkan Dandia. In this week's episode, I sit down with Brody Miller. Brody shares his story of experiencing malformation in his brain, which was causing him to have seizures and also impacting his decision-making capabilities earlier in life. Brody talks about how this experience has motivated him to work in the space of neurotransformation. Brody and I also touch on how we can change our mindset and decision-making capabilities through neuroplasticity. I hope you can get a lot out of this episode, and if at the end you could leave a 5-star review, I would truly appreciate it. Brody, thanks for joining the podcast. Super grateful for you to come on here and take the time to have this conversation with me. I think some of the topics I want to cover with you are quite relevant, and I'm super intrigued by them. I've been doing a lot of reading and listening to podcasts on neuroplasticity and neuroscience, so I'm really excited to hear your take on it. And before we get started, I just want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, where you're located, and what kind of work you're doing, especially in this space.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. First of all, I am from originally Asheville, North Carolina, a little town in the mountains in North Carolina in the United States. And I recently moved to Colorado Springs, Colorado in January of this year. And I am doing an online space as far as neurotransformations goes. Neurotransformations is a online addiction program to help young men gain confidence, because that's a key issue. I also deal with brain trauma, OCD, things of that nature. And I got in this space originally because it was almost forced into it, because 4.5 years ago, I had brain surgery. They removed a cavernous malformation in my left frontal lobe. It was leaking blood into my brain and causing me to have grand mal seizures. And before this occurred, I had horrible decision-making skills. I was involved in addiction. I had brain trauma. My decision-making skills were very poor, to say the least. And I later found out about neuroplasticity and neuroscience after the fact that I got, but I mean, my health was horrid. I had bilateral forearm pain, and I was still drinking after the brain surgery. And that's just insanity when you think about it, drinking with seizure medications. And luckily I ran into a few really positive influences, one being Joe Dispenza. And I also started reading and got into personal development a lot. And I ran into neuroscience and just really fell in love with it, and it changed my entire personality. So if you would have spoken to me maybe even a year ago, I was having trouble getting my words put together in a sentence, so much less getting on a podcast and talking to somebody like you who's involved in the brain space. So it just shows you that how amazing neuroplasticity is, and my entire personality has changed. I used to be an introvert. I feel actually extroverted now. And that was a lot of it was self-directed. I wanted to gain more confidence and things of that nature. And it's not just available to younger people. Neuroplasticity occurs at all ages. And of course, it's a little less as you age, but nonetheless, there's still ways of changing out there. And I really appreciate you once again having me on here, and would love to hear more about yourself.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, I think, obviously my story is not as significant as yours, but I think we all kind of face adversity that challenges us in different ways and forces us to, I feel like either you can choose to just stay in your old patterns and suffer and just blame everyone else, or you can take it upon yourself to make the change. And it sounds like that's something you did. It's something I've been doing, just going through separation and dealing with that. Adversity really forced me to look inward rather than just looking outward and, you know, saying, oh, it was this person that did this or that person did that. It was really, what am I doing and what can I do going forward? And, you know, for me, this space has been important. And I think I part of this platform for me is really getting men and talking about mental health. And you know, I not all my guests on the podcast have been men, but my primary focus is men's mental health, and just getting everyone to speak up and share stories, because I feel like the more you know, more stories that are out there, the more other men feel comfortable sharing their own and don't feel alone. So so that's kind of my goal in this space. But you know, I admire the work you've done, and even to come from where you were, you know, like you said, a year ago to now, that's very inspiring. And that's something, you know, when I read your story from the time you had your brain surgery, I really wanted to reach out to you and have this conversation. But you touched on a lot of stuff, and I want to tap into it a little bit. So I guess, you know, from a you mentioned the seizures and stuff like that. Do you mind expanding on that a little bit in terms of what was the source? I know you mentioned that, you know, like in your brain, the left, was it your left frontal lobe, you said?
Yes.
Yeah. So do you happen to know what was causing that? And at what point did you realize it was serious enough to go for surgery?
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up such a important topic, men's mental health. Like, it's needed more now than ever. And after I give you this explanation, we'll talk more about that, just because
Absolutely.
just is such an important topic. But the full story was that I was in an addiction recovery center in Arizona, and I was speaking to a sponsor at the time. And out of nowhere, there's just this wave, like my whole world was spinning around. I didn't know what was going on. And I woke up in the hospital. And so a cavernous malformation is just, it's like essentially a benign brain tumor. It's not exactly that, but it was leaking blood into the rest of the brain. And when blood is stimulated into your brain, you have an electrical reaction, which is, they call that a seizure. And mine were grand mal seizures. There's so many different forms of epilepsy, and it's not just grand mals. You'll have like moments where you're just staring off into space or doing things that are just completely out of the ordinary. But I ended up having surgery about 2 or 3 weeks after that, because everybody was so confused, didn't know what was going on. They did a brain scan when they took me to the hospital, and they found it. And they said, okay, it was this. Theoretically, it was caused, it was the malformation originated when I was younger, when I was born. They call it malformation, you know, it's not formed well, malformed, you know. And if you think of Spanish, mal is, you know, it's bad. So malformation, you know, bad form. Yeah. And anyway, it was just, it was necessary. And it was like about the size of a cranberry, I told you. And the left frontal lobe, I just studied the brain after the fact in neuroscience. And it's just so important for decision-making skills, motor skills. It's the prefrontal cortex is the decision maker. It's the conscious mind. It dictates to the rest of your body and mind what you're going to do. And it's, if you can utilize it appropriately, it will do wonders for you. But because there's a lot of talk about the subconscious mind, and in unconscious mind, and you want to utilize both. But if you can utilize the powers of the conscious mind too, that's a wonderful thing to do. So yeah, that's basically it.
Mm-hmm. So I guess before we move on, I think so when you mentioned, you were making poor decisions earlier in life, even leading up to your surgery and after. So it sounds like because you had this malformation on your left frontal lobe, that was primarily causing all of that, right? Is that fair to say?
100%.
Okay.
Of course, there was other things that I did to further damage my brain, such as, drinking, drugs, fighting, brain trauma, a lot of other poor decisions. But I mean, it's difficult to say what came first, the chicken or the egg of this. But and I like you said, I don't want to put the blame on anything. At that time, it's just really bad. But I mean, it definitely played a big role in that.
And I guess so. Part of the work you're doing now with young men in addiction, obviously, it sounds like you've been inspired by what you went through, and you want to help others. And can you expand on that a little bit in terms of like what was it that really inspired you, and how is that work going? Like, what are the progresses you've made in this space helping other people?
Sure, I can definitely elaborate on that. I ran into a book, and it's called Joe Dispenza, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself.
Yeah.
And it just talked such a scientific, fundamental level about how important each thought that we think is. And it gave me the hope that I could change myself, because it was just a complete disaster at the time. And that was like my first bit of juice. And then I ran into Robin Sharma, a monk who sold his Ferrari. And on, just so many wonderful sources of explaining how the brain works and functioning, and brain and body, in tandem. And that just really, really empowered me. And to elaborate on other things that helped, I got into Toastmasters, public speaking. I mean, just anything to put me out of my comfort zone. Really, just because from a primal standpoint, like your brain, it your lizard brain is sending you signals of fear all the time, and that's just what it does. But if you can learn to control your cerebral cortex, which is your prefrontal cortex, your limbic system, and your lizard brain, if you can learn bits and pieces about each information, then you can really start to gain a grasp of how to change.
And it's important that you touch on that, because I think a lot of the fact that we stay in our comfort zone is primarily also because of the fight or flight mechanism that we have built in with whenever our amygdala kicks in and bypasses the frontal cortex. And as you mentioned, our frontal cortex is the conscious mind. And the second we start giving power to that is when we can really get more control of our behaviors and some of the maladaptive ways we've figured out from the past, or the patterns we've had to deal with certain things. But yeah, so it's interesting to hear how you were able to really push yourself out. And as you mentioned, you were fairly introverted, but to be able to do Toastmasters and stuff like that, you were really stepping out of your comfort zone, which in itself is a form of growth. And that's when we really expand. But so with that being said, like, what is the work you're doing now with some of the young men? And I think a lot of it touches on, like you wanted to talk about, men's mental health.
Sure. Yeah. I right now am building a personalized online program for young men dealing with addiction issues, but it it won't only help addiction. It's going to help OCD, brain trauma, and it's not going to be exclusive to young men. It's whoever would like to enjoy the program, but that's kind of the focus market. Because when I was in addiction, active addiction, I had quite a few friends pass away, unfortunately. And they were great, wonderful people. And I would say a lot more intelligent than me. And, it was just so sad to see. And they had so much, they had the whole world going for them. But addiction, the disease of addiction, took them away. And in that time, there was so much toxic masculinity, big problem in the industry going on. I'm not going to say any names, but the people who were running the program, were just boosting up their ego. Hey, look at my car, look at my girl, look at, it was boosting a culture of just testosterone induced madness. And as a lot of guys in recovery, you'd feel lonely in a space like that. Like, just like, oh, they're just addicted to other things. I mean, we're all addicted to something because we're humans, but nonetheless, like, when it's just that obvious and ridiculous, it just, you're like, I thought there was a better life and all this, like, chain smoking cigarettes and chugging Red Bulls before AA meetings. Like, dude, you're not that's not healthy. So it's just like, I'm want to create a space where everybody feels safe. Everybody can learn the powers of the brain and the mind, and everybody can learn empowerment, and it can just be a positive environment and safe space. And so, like I said, right now I'm in the process of building an online program, and it should be out hopefully. I'm not going to give any timelines because I'm really, really trying to make it good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's more about the quality than trying to get it out on time, right? And that's what's important. I guess along those lines, like, we've talked about neuroplasticity to a certain extent, but, I really want to hear your experience in terms of, because I think, the term has obviously gained a lot of prominence, especially over the past couple of years. You often hear it now in common language, but I don't know if people fully appreciate what neuroplasticity is and what it requires. But, for someone who's experienced firsthand significant change, even over the last year, what I really want to hear is your story, and maybe you could share, like, what were some of the efforts and you made, and the discipline that it requires at times. And often, you hear people with OCD that struggle quite a bit because they keep resorting to the compulsive behaviors. But even in those cases, people are able to change their behavior patterns by focusing on healthier choices. So, I just want to hear your version of it.
Absolutely, man. And bringing up such great topics. First of all, neuroplasticity is also called brain plasticity. It's another way that it's referred to. It does require dedication. You're not going to change by just sitting on your ass.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's just, nothing works like that. I mean, sometimes you kind of are, because when you're meditating, you're sitting on your ass. That's a story for another day. I think that it's, a lot of people don't understand how powerful it is. I think common knowledge is people know about neuroplasticity, but they, might have heard a few things about it. But like, when it all starts with your thinking, your thoughts, or your beliefs. Like, of course, like, beliefs are very important, but a belief is just a thought that's thought many times until it strengthens. It's just a strengthened synaptic connection. But like, at a basic level, our brain controls our body. our mind and our brain, which are different things entirely, actually. The mind and brain. The brain is the physical subject. The mind is so much more.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
But
where almost that quantum mechanics comes into your, like, the connection between the brain and the mind, right? So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. And but once you understand, like, your brain controls your body, but your body also signals back to the brain, because you have, your heart, you have your gut. It's so much more than the brain. Of course, I became obsessed about it because of what happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
But your mind and your brain, they control a large percentage of what's going on. But it's also important to know that your body's sending signals. Like, for example, like when you meditate, you'll sit down and you'll feel these impulses up, and your body is trying to unseat you. It's trying to knock you off. Like, if you're sitting there and you want to move, that's usually your body trying to control your mind, and not the other way around. So
Mm-hmm.
it's super fascinating. I don't know if I talked about how people could get into it at a basic level, like where to start. I think that's a important thing to bring up. And for me, meditation gets very confused, unfortunately. Like, meditation just means to know thyself. Like, that's what the literal translation is. And so you're just knowing thyself more. And there's so many forms of meditation. So don't become afraid of that word. It is intimidating. It does sound difficult, but there's meditation can be as simple as you being out in the garden and enjoying the present moment,
Mm-hmm.
just enjoying the sun, breathing in, breathing out, things of that nature. So I really truly believe everybody can get involved with this. It's just there's a little bit of fear level, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, and I tell people you can meditate even walking, as long as you're counting your steps with your breath. That is meditating, and being present in that moment. So definitely. Yeah, like, maybe I know you said, like, for most people, from a basic standpoint, let's, like, if you want to, like, kind of unpack neuroplasticity, and if we want to explain to people, okay, well, you know the effort required, and changing your mindset, and the impulses that come to you, and not responding to them as you would, like, a reflex. Yeah, like, can you just unpack it a little bit, and like, from a very basic standpoint?
Yeah, yeah. And it gets so much easier. Things get easier. It may be so difficult in the beginning, so difficult, because you're fighting so many old negative pathways that your brain created. And it's a lot of times it's unwiring those old negative path connections and creating new synaptic connections. And it's just so it was very, very difficult at the beginning. I just said, heck, I'm going to try this meditation thing. I just dedicated myself. I would miss a couple of days, and sometimes I would miss 3 or 4 days, and I'd be like, wow, I actually felt a little bit better, just a little bit better from meditation. So I'm going to do it again. I'm just going to sit down, listen to some guided meditations, and let it happen. And I think it's very important for people to know it's better to meditate in the mornings or the nights, because you're going to get more bang for your buck. You're going to get more out of that meditation, because our brain has different uh, levels of consciousness. We go from beta to alpha to theta to delta, which delta is deep sleep. So you want to try to be in that level of alpha, which a lot of times you are in the early mornings, late night. You're already more receptive to the information coming in. And whether that be a guided meditation or however. But I think another really important thing for people to understand is there's a book that David Eagleman recently wrote, and he talked about how if you just read one page, your brain changes in a positive way from that. Maybe those aren't the exact words, but that just shows you how malleable, plastic, or how easily influenced we are by what we do. So if you just read one page, or if you just meditate for 1 minute, you're going to create these positive habits. Your brain is automatically going to change. I mean, I wouldn't say go listen to the news, but because that's not a good habit. Your brain's going to change in a negative way. So just be conscious and be more aware of what do you enjoy doing that is also positive for your brain and your body and your overall health.
Yeah, for sure. And I've experienced that myself, and most of the stuff I've read too, but it's just, I think a lot of the times, like you said, the synapses are formed earlier in childhood or even adolescence, where you just cope with certain things, whether it's trauma or anything, right? And our brain's job is to protect us. So those synapses are formed, but I think, like you said, plasticity can happen at any age. Obviously, it's a lot harder when you get older, but in my experience, I find often I've had maladaptive coping mechanisms with certain things, especially when I feel like I'm, like, quote unquote, in threat, the fight or flight, and I'll respond to protect myself. But it's being able to recognize those moments and slow things down. And like you said, meditation is really important, breathing techniques, grounding yourself, but it's really slowing yourself down and responding differently. And when you respond differently, obviously that's not going to be it's going to become a habit. It requires, like we said, determination and effort, and it needs to be practiced like you would practice your golf swing. And over time, the new synapses form where your brain doesn't immediately respond to that threat because it recognizes that it's not a threat.
You said it exactly right. Our brain's job is to keep us alive, and it's a good thing and it's a bad thing because I mean, keeping you alive, it can misrepresent that in our hectic, crazy world that we live in today, with social distancing and internet always on type mentality. And we have to realize that our brain still we haven't evolved as human beings yet to the extent to where our brain still send those primal signals. It still uses the lizard brain, and the areas closer to your brain stem, they send, and the amygdala, things of that nature. It's just so important to understand that, where we came from as humans and where we are now and why it's doing that. That will help you a little bit, but when you get triggered, it's like a trigger, and that trigger sends all these bad signals to your nervous system and your brain stem. And it's like, okay, my only job right now is to keep me alive. And that could be as simple as, somebody cutting you off in traffic, or a dog barking too close to you, or all kinds of things we get afraid of. But just know that it's not you. Like, it's not you. Like, you have thoughts and you have emotions, but you are not those thoughts and you are not those emotions. You have them, but you have the ability to create your thoughts and your emotions. So that's the most important thing I tell a lot of people is just, okay, yeah, you have that negative thought, you have that wacko thoughts. We all have wacko thoughts, like, but it's how you react to that thought. It's how it's okay. I could have the thought that I want to kill Joe Biden, you know. No, I don't actually want to kill him. That's just my crazy brain sending something crazy to my brain. But whatever, who knows where it came from? It arrived, but I can just laugh at that because I know that at the end of the day, when I was in active addiction, every thought, I would take so seriously. It's like my crazy brain would send crazy signals, and I would say, "Oh, what the, like." That's me, like that's my personality. No, it wasn't me, it's just a thought.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thoughts lost their power.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, you touch on that. So, I mean, other than meditation, what were some of the other things you did to navigate through those thoughts, and again, to be at a point where you are today, and helping others?
Wonderful question. One was deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, getting that air and oxygen into my prefrontal cortex, drawing that energy up into the prefrontal cortex. Another tool I used was hypnosis, hypnotherapy, a lot online. And I did actually pay for a few hypnotherapists to help me out. Another resource is NLP, neuro linguistic programming. Wonderful way of understanding your thoughts and how to deal with them. Cold showers, I'm a big fan of cold showers. Whenever I get angry, I'll just hop in uh, and just yell out when I'm in a cold shower, and it's very therapeutic, and it really puts you in the present moment. I mean, I could literally go on for the rest of this podcast about different stuff. But another one, exercise, eating healthy. You could, like I said, go on and on, reading, journaling. So if you enjoy any of that stuff, hop on the neuroplasticity train with us, because it's really a positive thing.
And just for clarity, so I mean, I think I've heard of NLP before, but do you mind expanding on that a little bit? Because I don't think a lot of the listeners would have, or it's not something that's very common.
Sure. NLP is neuro linguistic programming. I am I am not trained in it, but I definitely studied quite a bit of it. And the best way to describe it is like with a thought. Like, this is an example of NLP. It's so like when a thought comes in, it's a lot of visualization, like really extensive visualization that is very helpful for your mind. So one example of NLP is you have negative thoughts, right? We all do. And to treat the thought as a uh excuse me, my mind's, I'm freezing a little bit, but it's like to treat it like a TV screen, like a image on a TV screen. You see the thought, and to get rid of that negative thought that's so persistent, right? You imagine that thought as an image on a TV screen, and you keep making it smaller. You make it black and white, and you make it smaller, gradually smaller. And then you think of a really positive thought or positive image, and you put that as a TV, and you blow up that TV so big, just gigantically. And you repeat that in your brain as many times as needed. And eventually that negative thought is just hard to see. It's in black and white, and that big positive thought and positive emotion will help you out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah,
But that's just one small example.
right. So it sounds like it's a lot of visualization and also positive affirmations, right? In a sense.
Yes.
So a lot of people talk about positive affirmations, repeating them throughout the day. So I think that's a bit more proactive. So you're not waiting for the negative thoughts. And then visualization is very common, whether it's during meditation. There's another form of therapy that's called guided imagery.
Hmm.
So it sounds very similar to that. So a lot of tools that you had to learn to be able to get to where you are today. And what was that like? Like, obviously, like you mentioned your motivation behind it, but what was that like? Was it overwhelming at times where you're like, okay, this, because you listed off so many things, right? Like,
Yeah.
what was that feeling like at times? Where did you ever feel like, okay, this is too much, or did you have to like kind of piecemeal it and focus on one thing at a time?
Yeah, it was kind of a gradual process. I started one thing and then added on another. And I was like, oh, I like that. Oh, I like that. But at times, absolutely, it got really overwhelming and really bad. And what a really horrible thing that happens during change is it feels like we're reverting back to our old selves
Mm-hmm.
because in neuroplasticity in the brain, you're forming these new synaptic connections, but the old ones don't want to die away. The old connections and they're very strong and they've been there for many years, and so you're trying to build something new and create something beautiful, but this other will just sabotage you. You'll
Mm-hmm.
sabotage you and sabotage you. And even to this day, I'll still have negative thoughts and things like it's not a fairy tale land, but yeah, those, like, think about it. For 29 years, I
Mm-hmm.
fired and wired these negative connections and negative programming and things of that nature. So there, it was pretty damn strong. And then
Mm-hmm.
for 3-4 years or whatever, I'm building these new neural connections and new habits and things of that nature. But the old guy, he's still pretty strong at times.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that's fair. And I think, for people, there are times where you're gonna have setbacks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, it's not a fairy tale. It's not like you just transform over time and now you're this different person who knows how to behave and react in a positive way.
Right. Yeah. I'm not the owner of Tesla or anything like that. So
Yeah, so there are like instances where you do have setbacks, and I think that's a very pivotal point for many people where, they have a setback or a few here and there, and they're like, oh, this isn't working. What's the point? And, they go back to the drinking or they go back to the anger. I guess, like personally, I know that, you got to be persistent and you use the
mhm.
setbacks as learning moments. But, again, I want to get your perspective on it.
The brain and the mind. Let's think of the brain as a muscle. Think it when you go to the gym, do you pick up a 500-pound barbell and throw it over your head? No. But like, if you pick up like a 10-pound dumbbell and you push it over your head again and again, you're going to start getting better. And then you put on the 20. You're like, okay, the 20. And then a little bit of time, you got the 30. Sooner or later, you're up to 45, 50, whatever your goal is. And the brain's the same way. It's a muscle, and you can strengthen it or you can weaken it depending on your actions and decisions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, and like, using the same analogy of going to the gym, there's going to be days where you go and you can't lift the 30 pounds anymore. And you're going to have to just slide back to 25. And the next time you come, push it back to 30. So you don't use those
Exactly.
moments when you have to slip back a little bit on, it's the same with me. Like there's some days where I can't do my max weight, but that doesn't mean I just leave. It's
Yeah.
so, or walk away and tell myself that no, this isn't working. So, it's just highlighting for people that, anytime you're making change is hard. And if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. So
Mhm.
so that's where it's the same concept with neuroplasticity. It requires determination, effort, like we've said, persistence. And if you truly want to grow and make a change in your life, you need to put that effort in. Otherwise, you're just going to stay in the same habits and same behaviors, unfortunately.
Right. And for anyone who's listening, I'll speak directly to you and say, my story, yeah, my story is a bit uncommon, but there's way more people have overcome way worse obstacles than me. Like you hear stories of people in prison, changing their lives around, and people with way worse conditions, like uh people may not believe it, but people getting up out of wheelchairs and things of that nature. So that's how powerful your brain can be, whether you believe it or not.
No, I agree with you. And again, I appreciate you sharing your story. And, again, it's very inspiring to think about, over 4 years, how far you've come, and the fact that you're spreading that knowledge and wisdom to others and trying to help others. It's very inspirational and amazing in that sense. And I guess for people that want to find you on social media or online, what are some of the ways they can get a hold of you?
Sure. Check me out at Neural Transformations. It's NEURAL, Neural, and then Transformations. You can find me on there, YouTube, Facebook, all of the other things of that nature. So yeah, just check me out, hit me up, check out my content, and see. We'll go from there.
Yeah, and that's at Neural Transformations on Instagram, right?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Brody, thanks again for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
I truly, truly appreciate it. And hopefully we can maybe set up another one of these. I honestly 100% in an authentic manner. I really enjoyed this. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you. Well, that's the end of the episode. Thank you again for tuning in. As always, please leave a 5-star review. And until next week.